The Offspring from Alien Romulus was a xenomorph human engineer hybrid. This is a creature which was born aboard the freighter USCSS Corbelan. This was after the scavenger Kay Harrison opted to inject herself with the mutagenic compound Z-01, and it caused the unborn fetus inside her to mutate. The creature itself was born from a human fetus, which was exposed to Z-01. Now this itself is integral to explaining exactly what this creature is. Z-01 is a derivative of the mysterious alien pathogen, or the black goo. Within the film itself, the synthetic science officer Rook, which was stationed aboard the Renaissance station, reveals to us that they were using the xenomorph specimen to reverse engineer what they called the Prometheus strain. Now this is of course the black goo, the pathogen. But knowing now that the pathogen within the Renaissance station was called Z-01, it would appear that they were successful in at least reverse engineering a type of black goo. Not fully functional at this stage, and research was still ongoing, but they achieved something in a relatively short period of time. Now Rook reveals to the crew of the Corbelan, or what was left of them anyway, that Weyland-Yutani was trying to use this pathogen, this mutagen, to move humanity's evolution into what they called perfect beings, like the xenomorphs. They wanted to use the Prometheus strain to mutate, heal, and hopefully genetically modify humans' physiology. And with the results on the Renaissance station, they had mild success. Not 100% success, but mild success. We see the experiment on a rat, which unfortunately did result in that rat's death. So Kay injects herself with Z-01. This mutates her, as well as her unborn fetus. Now it would appear that the offspring, the unborn fetus, bore the majority of the pathogen. The host is mutated, but minor mutations. The unborn fetus was entirely transformed, began to gestate within inside a cocoon. This cocoon resembled an ovomorph, very similar, of course, to the xenomorph egg. Now, this miniature cocoon, this miniature ovomorph, was then live birthed from Kay Harrison. And once the creature had hatched, which did actually resemble a human baby, it left an acidic fluid which came out of the cocoon. Now this small baby grew very quickly. Now once grown, the offspring took a form which resembled a cross between a xenomorph and an engineer. And we actually know from Fede Alvarez that this was entirely intentional. In an interview, Fede Alvarez revealed, quote, "I was hoping that people picked up the whole engineer part of it. The black goo is the root of the whole thing that was introduced in Prometheus. It's the root of all life, but also particularly the xenomorphs come out of that thing, which means it has to be inside them. It's the xenomorph's semen, almost. So we thought, if it affects your DNA and the engineers clearly come out of the same root of life, it made complete sense to me that the offspring of a human and a xenomorph was going to look like that. It's probably a new species, because that mix has never happened before." Now this offspring was pale and very smooth, although it did retain some biomechanical features. Now despite being minutes old, the offspring grew to a height which would have towered over even some of the largest engineers. The offspring was incredibly thin and almost deformed looking. It had an upper body which was twisted and crooked and slanted, lopsided, all to the right-hand side. In its infancy, it had a tail, a very short one, very similar to the xenomorph. The back of the offspring had armor plates across the spine, and it also had what looked like outlets for what would have become dorsal tubes if the offspring had lived long enough. Facially, it did resemble an engineer, raised brow ridges, high nose, and pure black eyes, and of course a very pale colour. The teeth were crossed between a human's and a xenomorph's. In shape they were the humans, but in colour they resembled the metallic sheen which we see on those xenomorphs. Both its hands and feet had very sharp claws, which it did in fact use as weapons. It's very, very strong. It was able to completely disable Andy with one slash. And perhaps interestingly, it also had something similar to the xenomorphs with its secondary set of jaws. It had a retractable tongue, very flexible and fluid in its movements, and that also had a secondary set of jaws within it. It also used this second set of jaws to suckle from its mother, Kay Harrison, who, due to using the mutagen, had begun to produce more of the pathogen, or what can be theorised to be the pathogen anyway. Now I guess you could say that Weyland-Yutani achieved what they set out to, in creating a compound which would accelerate humans' evolution. The Offspring was able to survive the vacuum of space for quite some time. It was also incredibly strong, being able to smash down metal doors. Now we don't know exactly how much further the Offspring would have mutated. The creature itself had gone through several changes during its presence on screen. The tail, for instance, had grown full length within seconds. So what exactly is the Offspring? Well, I think the clue is in what Fede Alvarez said within an interview. Again, I repeat it, quote, "I was hoping that people picked up the whole engineer part of it. The black goo is the root of the whole thing that was introduced in Prometheus. It's the root of all life, but also particularly the xenomorphs come out of that thing, which means it has to be inside them. It's the xenomorph semen almost. So we thought if it affects your DNA, and the engineers clearly came out of the same root of life, it made complete sense to me that the offspring of a human and a xenomorph was going to look like that." Now, that is very, very revealing, but also it's the last little bit of that interview where he says it's probably a new species because that mix has never happened before. So, what does he mean by this? Well, I think this is an element of Weyland-Yutani with Z-01, them actually being successful to a degree with adjusting the mutagen. But also, very particularly in what he says, it's the xenomorph's semen. The xenomorph comes out of it, but it's also within it. It is the root of all life. The engineers came out of the same root of life. And as he says, it is the offspring of a human and a xenomorph. Now we know that the xenomorphs have a DNA reflex. Whatever host that the facehugger latches onto will have an element infused into the resulting xenomorph. Now this is explained, I guess now, by the fact that the xenomorph has a pathogen within it, a mutagen property. And so when a xenomorph procreates with a facehugger and of course resultant chestburster, the DNA reflex is now explained by the black goo. It is injecting a form of a black goo, or at least because the pathogen is within the xenomorph itself, it is constantly taking elements from its host to mutate itself moving forwards to become a perfect organism, whatever host planet it is on. Now when you concentrate down the black goo or the pathogen Z-01 and you inject it into a host that, say, has a fetus for instance, the pathogen itself will work in exactly the same way as what a facehugger would do, albeit on a more concentrated level. The pathogen itself is working in a very, very similar way. It's having a DNA reflex. So it is taking traits from the host, but also because Fede Alvarez states that the engineers clearly came out of the same root of life. It's my theory that he's alluding to the two sets of engineers that we've seen before. The ones in Prometheus, so the Prometheus strain of engineers, the ones which had clearly been able to hybridize themselves and make them more biomechanical. And then, of course, the ones that we see in Covenant. And because we come from engineers, it makes sense that the result of this pathogen, which has come directly from a xenomorph and its DNA reflex, would result in something similar to an engineer moving forward. Because the engineers that we see in Prometheus are the result of several experimentation cycles with the black goo that the engineers themselves were going through. And because we came from the engineers, it would make sense that there would be a very similar evolutionary process enabled within us. So there you go. A fun little explained video on what the Offspring is. Now this is of course a very controversial element of Alien Romulus, so I'd love you to leave your thoughts down below. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye bye now.